Open your refrigerator for a second. You'll probably see chicken, maybe beef, maybe bacon, and none of that feels unusual. Those animals are so completely tied to the idea of food that we rarely stop and ask why. But imagine opening that same refrigerator and finding something very different. Hippo steaks, hippo sausages, maybe even a pack of smoked river bacon. Sounds ridiculous, right? Except a little over a century ago, the United States seriously considered bringing African hippos into the country, releasing them into southern wetlands and turning them into a new source of meat. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't science fiction. Politicians discussed it. Experts supported it. Newspapers covered it. And if that plan had succeeded, the American dinner plate might look completely different today. But the most fascinating part isn't that people wanted to eat hippos. It's why the plan never became reality. Because that answer reveals something strange about your food, human civilization, and how little control any of us had over the menu we inherited. Before we jump into this bizarre, forgotten story, if you enjoy discovering the hidden history behind ordinary life, tap the like button and subscribe, because this channel is all about the real stories that sound impossible until you look closer. All right, let's talk about the animal America almost put on the menu. Now, you're probably thinking there's a very simple reason we don't raise hippos for meat. They're terrifying. And honestly, that's fair. An adult hippo can weigh several thousand pounds. Its mouth opens frighteningly wide, and its enormous teeth can do serious damage in seconds. Hippos may look slow, but they can move surprisingly fast on land. In rivers, they're even harder to predict. They don't swim in the way most people imagine. They often push themselves along the bottom, disappearing beneath dark water before suddenly surfacing. They're territorial, powerful, and extremely difficult to control. So that settles it, right? Hippos were simply too dangerous to become food. Not quite. Humans have never needed their meals to be harmless. People have hunted whales from wooden boats, followed giant animals across frozen landscapes, and faced predators with little more than spears. Even today, humans harvest dangerous animals like alligators, wild boar, and sharks. Danger can make obtaining meat difficult, but it doesn't automatically remove an animal from the menu. And we know this because people really did eat hippos. Travel back thousands of years to the Nile River. At the time, hippos weren't exotic creatures hidden in distant wildlife reserves. They were a major part of the landscape. After sunset, they left the water to graze. During the day, groups of them gathered in rivers and marshes. Fishermen, farmers, and boat crews had to live alongside animals capable of destroying crops or overturning small vessels. The ancient Egyptians feared hippos, but they also admired them. The female hippo became associated with protection and motherhood. The goddess Taweret was commonly shown with the heavy body of a pregnant hippo, along with features from other powerful animals. But hippos weren't only symbols. They were also hunted. For elite hunters, confronting one could demonstrate courage and authority. For communities living near the river, a successful hunt could provide a huge amount of meat and fat. So hippo meat wasn't rejected because it tasted terrible or because humans couldn't kill the animal. People ate it. That means our mystery remains. If hippos were edible and humans had hunted them before, why didn't they become livestock? To understand that, we need to visit America in 1910. The United States was growing quickly. More people were moving into cities, and concern was rising over the price and supply of meat. Beef and pork were important parts of the American diet, but feeding an expanding population wasn't cheap. At the same time, parts of the South had another crisis. Water hyacinth, a floating plant originally from South America, was spreading through rivers and wetlands. At first glance, the plant looked beautiful. It produced delicate purple flowers and was sometimes treated like decoration. But outside its original ecosystem, it could grow into dense, floating mats. Those mats blocked waterways, interfered with boats, reduced light below the surface, and created serious problems for fish and native plants. Officials wanted a solution. They needed something that could eat large amounts of vegetation and survive in warm, wet environments. Then came an extraordinary proposal. Bring in hippos. Supporters argued that African hippos could live in the wetlands of Louisiana and other parts of the Gulf Coast. The animals would consume unwanted plants, helping clear the waterways. Then, once their population grew, they could be harvested for meat. One animal, two national problems solved. Among the idea's supporters were men with experience in Africa, including the famous scout Frederick Russell Burnham and the adventurer Fritz Duquesne. Louisiana Congressman Robert Broussard introduced legislation seeking federal funding to import useful foreign animals. The proposal became associated with what history now remembers as the American Hippo Bill. Some supporters even promoted hippo meat using the unforgettable label Lake Cow Bacon. And the strangest thing is that many Americans didn't immediately laugh the idea out of Washington. At the time, importing animals to reshape an environment could sound practical and modern. Knowledge of invasive species was limited, and the ecological disasters caused by introduced animals weren't yet as widely understood. To supporters, hippos looked less like monsters and more like giant, self-reproducing lawnmowers made of meat. The legislation never became law. America moved on. But suppose the money had been approved. Suppose ships filled with hippos had crossed the Atlantic and released them into southern rivers. Would the plan have worked? Almost certainly not in the way supporters imagined. There's an enormous difference between eating an animal and domesticating it. Hunting requires you to control an animal once. Farming requires you to control its entire species, generation after generation. A useful farm animal must satisfy a surprisingly difficult list of conditions. It needs affordable food. It must grow quickly enough to justify the cost of raising it. It needs to reproduce reliably around humans. It has to tolerate fences, crowds, noise, transportation, and regular handling. Most importantly, it can't constantly treat its caretakers as enemies. Cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and horses didn't become manageable overnight. Humans shaped them over thousands of years by repeatedly breeding animals with useful physical and behavioral traits. Slowly, their descendants became better suited to life around people. Hippos never went through that process. They're strongly territorial. They're difficult to contain. They mature relatively slowly, and keeping thousands of them near farms, boats, and towns would create enormous risks. A fence that holds cattle isn't necessarily stopping an angry hippo. And unlike many herd animals, hippos don't offer humans an easy leadership position. You can guide sheep by influencing the flock. You can train horses to respond to commands. You can move cattle by understanding their group behavior. A hippo doesn't care about your job title. It doesn't recognize you as the manager of the river. To a hippo, you're either something to ignore or something that might need to be removed. Decades later, part of America's abandoned idea appeared unintentionally in Colombia. Drug trafficker Pablo Escobar kept exotic animals at his private estate, including several hippos. After his death in 1993, managing the animals became a serious problem. Moving an adult hippo is expensive, complicated, and dangerous. Some escaped into the surrounding environment. Colombia offered many of the conditions hippos needed: warm weather, abundant water, vegetation, and no natural predator capable of controlling them. So they multiplied. What began as a few animals became a growing feral population. The hippos didn't behave like convenient livestock. They moved through rivers, approached human settlements, and introduced huge amounts of waste into aquatic ecosystems. Scientists and officials were left with a difficult question. How do you control a dangerous, rapidly reproducing animal that people have also grown emotionally attached to? Colombia became a warning the American planners of 1910 never got to see. Introducing a large animal is easy. Controlling everything that happens afterward may be impossible. This leads to a bigger question. With millions of animal species on Earth, why do humans repeatedly eat the same small collection? Chicken, cattle, pigs, sheep, goats. It's not because those were the only animals that tasted good. They were simply among the animals that could survive the complicated partnership demanded by domestication. Their ancestors ate manageable food, reproduced around humans, grew at a useful rate, and possessed behavior that farmers could influence. Countless other animals failed one or more of those tests. Zebras were difficult to manage. Many deer species panicked in confinement. Some animals grew too slowly. Others needed expensive diets or refused to breed under human control. Hippos failed spectacularly. They offered plenty of meat, but almost none of the cooperation required to produce that meat safely, cheaply, and repeatedly. So the hippo didn't disappear from our menu because humans were too frightened to taste it. It disappeared because farming rewards cooperation more than size. The animals in your refrigerator aren't necessarily nature's most delicious animals. They're the descendants of species whose biology allowed them to live, breed, and travel beside human beings. That biological compatibility shaped agriculture. Agriculture shaped cities. Cities shaped nations. And those nations eventually shaped the food available in your local supermarket. The next time you order a burger, remember that you're seeing the result of thousands of years of selection, migration, survival, and luck. In another version of America, Louisiana might have hippo ranches. Restaurants might advertise river steaks, and lake cow bacon might sound as ordinary as pork. But that world never arrived. The hippo had the size. It had the meat. It could survive the climate. What it didn't have was the willingness to surrender control. And that may be the real reason this enormous animal never became dinner. Humans could hunt it. Politicians could plan for it. Congress could debate it. But the hippo was never interested in joining the farm.